Okay, hi guys. Pardon my ugly office background. It's not my lovely screen thing. I needed to get this recorded, so I am in my office between two clinic sessions, and here we are. Today we're going to talk about deficiency versus excess in terms of Eastern healing and traditional Chinese medicine. Deficiency and excess are the principles that take it from traditional Chinese philosophy into actual traditional Chinese medicine. Because you can talk about yin and yang, and you can talk about vital substances and the ethereal hoon and 5 elements and all kinds of things forever. And unless you're talking about those things being in or out of balance in the body, you're not necessarily talking about health versus illness. So we are going to look at the 4 basic patterns that you see when you are addressing the idea of excess versus deficiency. So in your handout, there is a little graph that has like blue and red bars. And so that's the visual aid that you want to look at when we're looking at these. And our example is going to be a sink with taps, right? So if you imagine you have a faucet and then like a hot and a cold tap, if both of those are like, if both the hot and the cold tap are on in a balanced way, the water temperature would be like a comfortable medium, and the water pressure would be like full, clear pressure, right? And that would be a balance. Now, in reality, our yin and yang is like a dynamic balance depending on what's going on that day, but you get the idea. So, so let's say what happens when one of those things goes out of balance. The first one we're going to look at is a yang deficiency, or what's called a cold jus pattern. In the next graph, you can see that the yang has been like brought down, and the yin is brought down a little bit too. And if these were water taps, now the water would feel cold because you turned the hot water down, right? And the water pressure would be lower, you know, more towards like a slower trickle than that full clear pressure when they were both on. And the yin, you will see in the graph, the yin is also slightly depressed, and that's because of the property of mutual support, right? The yin cannot function at 100% if the yang is not also full and vibrant. So in real life, in real life, this pattern is someone who has been like pushing and pushing in that moment and has depleted a bunch of their yang superficial energy, right? Like they just ran a marathon and they're tired, or they just like pulled an all-nighter, right? Their deep reserves are not heavily affected, but they definitely need to rest. So this is someone who they're going to present with fatigue in some way. They may be fatigued from not sleeping or fatigued from overexerting, but they're going to be fatigued in some way, shape, or form. And the cure is like they just need to rest for a bit. After, you know, if you see an athlete after a marathon, they're exhausted, you know, and oftentimes they'll be given one of those like shiny blankets. Or if you've ever been a little fatigued, sometimes it's easy to like feel just tired and kind of chilly, and you just don't have a lot of zhuzh in your day, and you feel like you just kind of need a hot drink and go to bed, you know. And so this is someone who their yang has been depleted. Now, if you do the opposite, a yang excess, this is a graph, that's the next graph over, and the yang is like up above the fill line, and the yin is been down like been pushed down too. And so obviously if your yang is excessive, it's going to burn up some of your yin. And so the yin will be depleted somewhat, right? And so in this case, if you have that yang excess or heat shi, right? It's a heat pattern, and it's a heat pattern from excess. This is someone who that yang is like flaring up, and that can be in the form of someone who's like angry. They're getting red in the face, they're yelling, they're being excessive, they're slamming things around, and they have a diminished capacity for yin type activities. They have a diminished capacity to just be calm and contemplative and reflective because they're mad. It could also be someone who has a fever, so that would be considered an excess of yang because you have too much heat building up in the body. If you have like a joint that is red and swollen, that's considered like a local excess of yang, that local excess of heat in that one joint or that set of joints. In our water example, right, this is, the water would be hot and the pressure would be like rushing and firm of that water pressure. So you can tell that it's heat because the heat has been turned, it's hot because the hot has been turned up. So these are people who are not necessarily going to be presenting with a ton of fatigue. Like in the fever example, it would be someone who is like feeling a little bit manic or whatever, but they have heat or redness, or and this presents like it can present on the psycho-emotional side as well as the like physical side of being hot. They can also be angry or yelling. So now let's look at the yin patterns. Yin deficiency or heat zhu, the yin is depleted, and therefore the yang does not have the sustenance that it needs or the foundation it needs to thrive. So in the graph, you'll see that the yin is way down and the yang has come down a little bit too. In this one, if we're looking at our sink of water, like our faucet of water, the water is hot, just like in a heat excess pattern. The water is hot in a yin deficiency, but the pressure is like really low and more trickling. The pressure is slow and weak. It's too hot because the cold was turned down, not because the heat was turned up. So this happens to people a lot in our culture. These are people who kind of push themselves and are kind of low grade stressed out just all the time. They have slowly depleted their deep energy reserves by not providing themselves with enough rest and rejuvenation. So these are people who wake up and are already still tired, you know, just in the morning when they first wake up. These are people who they are just permanently exhausted by life, but they still get up and they make breakfast and they drive the kids to school and they go to work and they get everything done and they continue to push. They have yang energy to get things done in their day, but deep inside their bones, they're exhausted. And again, this is a super common pattern today. And so this person, they can still get up, they can still do their job, they can still live their life. But if you ask them if they have fatigue, they're like, oh yeah, I'm just tired all the time. Coffee, 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 and it does nothing for me, you know? So that would be a heat zhu or a yin deficiency. Yin excess or cold shi is when yin is overflowing, and therefore yang has been slightly depleted because it's been like smothered. In this case, the water would be cold because you turned the cold up. So in this example, the nature of yin is not just cold, it's also like condensing. And so these may be people who have excessive stillness in their lives. They sit at a computer and just sit still all day, and then they come home and they sit on the couch and watch Netflix all day, and they just have a lot of stillness in their lives. And so these people may have condensed a little bit of extra weight onto their bodies, and you know, they have a lot of stillness, but they're not necessarily like permanently exhausted. They can still stay up until 3 a.m. watching Netflix. You know, they can still like do stuff. It's not that they're overly tired, it's just that they have a lot of stillness, and they maybe they're stuck in a rut. You know, they have that stuck in a rut feeling. And so we see that yang has been smothered, because if they were to try to get up and do like a, you know, normal, what a fit person would consider a normal exercise routine, they would find it very difficult, because that yang spark isn't balanced. It's kind of smothered by all this excess yin. And so I think that the long-term issues with yin excess have already been well documented in our health fields, in terms of, you know, physical activity and fitness leading to heart health and resilience and a good quality of life and stuff. So that's kind of that pattern. So in the TCM model, it's important to see the difference between a hot and a cold pattern, and between a deficiency or an excess pattern. And all treatment models will boil down to one of 4 goals: strengthen yin, strengthen yang, remove excess yin, or remove excess yang. So if a person comes in who runs hot all the time and is having hot flashes and is having, you know, just warm stuff, but it's because of a yin deficiency, and you go in there and you remove yang to try to equal out their temperature without taking into consideration that it was a deficiency, you know, pattern, they're going to leave feeling deficient and weak in their vitality, right? So we have to know, are we strengthening or are we clearing excess? And are we doing that to their yang meridians, or are we doing that to their yin meridians? So these things come together when we start looking at how we are treating the different people. And so the way we do that is we're going to continue in future weeks looking at vital substances and 5 elements, and then we will continue to the meridians. And so, yeah, that is kind of the gist, is you have to be able to discern, is it a deficiency or an excess, and is it a hot or a cold pattern? And then the other details will kind of inform you. Are you at the chi level or the deep yin level? Are you on this meridian or that meridian? But that's basically how it works. That is all of shiatsu and mostly all of traditional Chinese medicine, right in a nutshell, in those 4 principles. So I hope that this was cool. And in your discussion thing today, just a normal 3-point discussion board deal. You can just talk about if anything from the handout or this little run-through lecture popped out at you, or you found interesting, or just what your, you know, feelings or reactions were. So thanks. Bye, guys. I will talk to you later.